Oh, that was a funny thing I read, but I didn't really make a note of, was during the filming of Moon Zero 2, Hammer wanted to make a sci-fi movie with Christopher Lee in the lead, but the American backers wanted the lead from Moon Zero 2 instead.
Oh dear.
This time we watched Season 1, Episode 11, Moon Zero 2.
You know the one.
Yes! But first, Kickstarter news. As of this recording, we're already over the $5 million mark, and there's more than 24 hours to go.
Yeah, oh God, somebody else just gave money. I've got the live cam on here, and we are at 5.2 million with over a day to go. This is going to make it no problem. I feel pretty confident that we're going to hit even the $5.8 million stretch goal that we don't know about at time of recording.
Yeah, we should get more episodes then. Come on. If it's so cheap to make them after you get that initial 2.2 million. Come on, Joel, don't be a cheapskate.
It's there's another person giving. There's another person giving. It's fun if you like watching numbers go bigger. This is basically an idle game at this point. We just cookie clicker away.
Yes, first there were flying toasters, now there's Kickstarter.
There's been a lot of events happening this week. Lots of live screenings where they watch an old episode and have a bunch of people sit around and watch it with them. And there's been a few other things. They did a Jackbox night, which they could have called.
Yeah, they stole our idea.
Yeah, we've been doing this for a long time now. Every Friday night, you can come catch us at twitch.tv/megaphonicfm. We do it every Friday night.
Yeah.
But fine, they didn't call us. That's okay. I have barely looked at any of the stuff that they've been doing in this week of live streaming.
Mm-hmm.
It's a lot of content, and I have other things I need to do. I hear it's been pretty fun for some people who've watched it, so cool.
Yep, have fun watching MST3K with the new cast. It'll be great. It was kind of funny that the last one, they were advertising a very special guest, but they were keeping it under wraps, and so that led to a lot of people guessing who it would be on like the forums, and I knew who it wasn't going to be. People who said they weren't going to be involved in the show aren't going to suddenly appear,
right.
for like a live stream. And so watching people kind of froth at the mouth and go, it's like, maybe it'll be Mike, maybe it'll be Trace, maybe it'll be Frank, maybe it'll be all of them. And then it was just some guy from Zombie Nightmare. It was kind of funny.
Which, Zombie Nightmare is a good episode. We've talked about it. It's one of our favorites.
Yeah, it's a great episode. It was funny to watch that play out.
Yeah. Well, if you're hearing this, it's probably too late. I have no idea what happens after Kickstarters go to bed. But we'll get a bunch more work to do. We'll get 12 more episodes if it's just a show indirectly happening because 12 more episodes of MST3K have been made.
And that's why this Kickstarter has been so successful, I think.
I think so.
Yeah.
They could go to patreon.com/itsjustashow or itsjustashow.com/Patreon and, be a little more direct about it. But it's cool. So you stay cool, everybody. Be indirect.
Should you so choose.
Hey there, Chris here, editing this after the Kickstarter has ended. And of course, there was a sneaky last-minute bonus stretch goal, which means that there's going to be 13 new episodes of MST3K, and therefore 13 new episodes of It's Just a Show, plus whatever we do with the shorts. So, yeah, we're sticking around for at least a half a year longer than we have been planning to. That's cool. Anyway, back to the show. That is everything I wanted to talk about before we start talking about... So if you're good to go, I'm good to go.
Yeah. I think we're ready to head off to our cartoon selves, and then our cartoon selves will head off to the moon.
And now, Season 1, Episode 11. It is the far distant future, May 9th, 2021 to be exact, and mankind has started inhabiting the moon, Mars, and even Venus. Bill Kemp was one of the brave people who helped make this possible. He captained the ship that first landed on Mars and was the first man to set foot on Mars. But there's not much call these days for rugged, pathologically sarcastic explorers with a death wish. But Kemp doesn't want to be a passenger pilot. Instead, he flies a rickety old space ferry, doing odd jobs and salvaging busted satellites for scrap. Enter our other two main characters. Clementine Taplin is a newcomer to the moon. Her brother has a prospecting claim on the far side of the moon, and he'd asked her to come help because he'd finally hit pay dirt. But when she arrives, he's not there to meet her. And because the satellite is down, there's no communication right now to the distant parts of the moon. Oh, also arriving on the moon is J.J. Hubbard, who's one of those super rich dudes who is 100% confident in coming off like a knockoff Bond villain. Hubbard wants to hire Kemp too. Okay, there's an asteroid that's made almost entirely out of sapphire, and the plan is to attach rockets to it to sort of redirect it so it crashes into the far side of the moon. Super illegal, but no one has been paying attention to the asteroid except for Hubbard, and communication with the far side of the moon right now is super bad, so hey, who'll know? So, Operation Sapphire, it's actually going to take 2 visits to redirect the asteroid to get it to land just right. And between these 2 space trips, Clementine hires Kemp to figure out what's going on with her brother. They take a long trip in a space buggy out to her brother's site and find he's been murdered. Now, this has happened either because he's just found a massive vein of nickel that would have made him rich and other prospectors are trying to grab onto it, or because Hubbard needed to have access to his land in order to crash his sapphire meteor there. Or, maybe both. I don't know. Anyway, Hubbard, turns out, had him killed. So Kemp doesn't want to work with Hubbard anymore. But Hubbard and his goons strong-arm him into it. Joke's on them, though, because once they're on the asteroid again, Kemp does some clever moves and manages to strand the bad guys on the asteroid. And they crash into the moon. And now Clementine has inherited her brother's claims, and she's going to be rich with all that sapphire. And I guess that's a happy ending, so the end.
Meanwhile, on the Satellite of Love, in the prologue, Joel instructs viewers that if they're making a between-commercial snack, they should make something extra nice because Joel's eating vicariously through the viewer. For the invention exchange, Joel presents a device that allows you to drink and eat some distance away from your food. It's all part of what Joel thinks drive-thrus will evolve into, namely the drive-by restaurant. Next, the Mads give us celebrity vomiting toothpaste heads, complete with references to The Exorcist and Monty Python's Meaning of Life. Segment 2 sees Joel and the bots doing a very charming tribute to the space program with cardboard. It's low on budget, but high on imagination, and it might just feature the worst JFK impression you'll ever hear, courtesy of Joel.
Ask not what your country can do for you, rather what you can do for your country.
For our third segment, Joel and the bots are still reeling over the film's hilarious Monopoly pun, and devise games that will be played in the future. This ends with a match of Rock'em Sock'em robots with Tom and Crow. In segment 4, the bots argue over who is the sexiest babe in today's movie, which devolves into a zero-gravity space fight thanks to Joel. We conclude with the bots getting a RAM chip, or do they, when they present a good thing and a bad thing about today's movie. The end.
Give Crow his RAM chip.
Yes, that is the Easter egg of the episode, is that Crow, despite playing along for a rarity for Crow, does not get a RAM chip.
Oh, it's cruel and inhumane.
That's probably why he became the Bart Simpson of the show, at least when Trace was operating Crow.
So this is a season 1 episode. We haven't done one of these in a little while. Mm-hmm. Season 1, notoriously a little underbaked. What did you think of Moon 02?
Well, that's a Moon 02 of a question, because this movie is super fun. I had a blast watching this movie. It's got a colorful cartoon that would not be out of place in the Bullwinkle show. It's got colorful costumes, including a space outfit that is lime green.
Yes.
Which is the rarest of treats. Like everyone, like either in the moon interior, the moon mall that they all live in, or whether they're outside on the moon's surface, they're all dressed like mascots for lollipop brands, and that's kind of great. And so like I absolutely love the set design. There's some very fun acting, especially the guy who's playing 100% Hubbard, who doesn't seem to be taking the film even remotely seriously. And so there's some fine ham from him, but there's some fine ham all around. Yeah, and like even the sort of whack hero is not the worst actor to play a whack hero on this show. So I ended up enjoying the movie. I thought the episode was kind of like what you expect from season one, which is like not that many jokes.
Yeah. So I was intrigued by this movie. I certainly loved the colors as you described them. I think it's really great. I think the sort of interior design of it all is just wild. It's, I guess, somewhere between 2001, which this film owes a bit to, let's say, and Star Crash, right?
Yeah. Definitely more Star Crash than 2001.
It is definitely more Star Crash, more Barbarella-y, but, definitely in the world of 2001. I don't know. It feels like it didn't quite make up its mind, but it definitely knows it wants extreme costumes, and those are completely delightful.
Mm-hmm.
I hated the hero. I thought he was insufferable.
See, I think that goes with how he's written rather than the performance.
Well, I mean, he's written badly, and then performed badly, right? Like he can't even pull off that non-stop sarcasm very well. None of it comes off as very likable or believable. He's just awful.
He's easily overshadowed by everyone else. I'd agree there.
Yeah. And so I was enjoying it, and I decided to watch it unmisted.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if you watched the movie Unmisted.
No. I saw that it was on YouTube, and I thought, that's neat. And I thought, no, I've seen plenty of Moon Zero too.
Sure. Well, here's what I want to say. Watching it unmisted, it's a much better movie.
Yeah.
It's like not actually that bad a movie. It's a very silly movie. You don't need to watch it. It's not good in that sense, but it is a fun movie. And all sorts of things that come off as not so great when you watch the misted version of it, like, say, the soundtrack, which we might talk about in a bit, are much better when the robots aren't negging it the whole time. And I thought that was super interesting.
Yeah, I mean that sounds like the best possible experience you can have watching a movie unmisted, because usually it's just like, oh, that's what happened to John Saxon.
Or it's something like Girls Town, which I always thought was going to be a really great movie unmisted because it's such an enjoyable episode and the movie seems like it's fun. And it's like the pace is so bad. It's so slow if those downbeats aren't taken up with jokes. Mm-hmm. This is not like that. This is just fine. It's just very competent and silly and visually delightful. I don't want to say this is one of those rare episodes where the MST3Kification of it actively made the film worse. That does happen sometimes. But I don't think it's that bad. But it is a much nicer movie than I thought it was when I just watched the episode.
Yeah, it's got a lot going for it. So I'm glad to hear it, and I'm not surprised that Moon 02 provided a good time.
So who was the genius who assembled all these colorful pieces and put them out before us?
Roy Ward Baker.
Oh, okay. It's like the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles theme song. You can just add it to anything.
Yeah. That works out perfectly, don't you think?
It does. I've never heard of Roy Ward Baker outside of this film. Who he?
Well, Roy Ward Baker, as you can tell, having watched the movie Unmisted, is a competent director, which is some of the highest praise you can get from anyone featured on MST3K. He's even made great films. He's certainly made good films. But yes, it all begins when a young boy falls in love with movies after watching the film Broadway Melody at age 13. He then begins working as an assistant to different directors, and in his early career he was an assistant to Alfred Hitchcock for The Lady Vanishes in 1938, and he also worked as an assistant to third man director Carol Reed on Night Train to Munich in 1940.
No, that's to Mundo Fine.
Yes, that's why John Carradine sings that great song in it. And then afterwards, there's a slight break from filming because Baker enlisted in the Army, but he's soon absorbed into the Army Cinematography Service, or AKS.
Okay, this is during World War II?
Yes. And so he's making military documentaries.
Oh.
Yeah. And then after the war, he's able to make it as a director. And, he's a bit of a rising star. He helms a movie with Marilyn Monroe in the melodrama Don't Bother to Knock in 1952. And he is well remembered for the Titanic melodrama A Night to Remember in 1958.
Oh, yeah, the Titanic one. Yeah.
Yeah.
I haven't seen that, but I have heard of that one for sure.
Yeah, and about these, like, we haven't even gotten to Baker's best stuff, because Baker would work for Hammer. That's the important thing, as Moon 02 demonstrates, and he did a plumb good job with his choice of colors and having a cartoon before the feature.
Do all his movies feature that after some point?
Sadly, no, but they all should.
Yeah.
So Baker's best film is 1967's third Quatermass film, Quatermass in the Pit, which really shows what a flair Baker had for horror, which made him perfectly at home in Hammer. He would flip back and forth between Hammer and Amicus. Amicus we talked about in our episode on...
At the Earth's core.
At the Earth's core, where they also did an atypical non-horror movie. And yeah, he made movies such as Asylum for Amicus and Scars of Dracula for Hammer. He had a steady career in TV where he directed, namely, Emma Peel era episodes of The Avengers.
Ooh.
Yeah, where he demonstrated some real style. Equally important to Quatermass in the Pit and doing Emma Peel era Avengers episodes and doing some cool movies for Amicus and Hammer is that he directed Amicus's final film, The Monster Club, starring Vincent Price, John Carradine, and you guessed it, Donald Pleasance.
Oh, all right. That can't go wrong with those people.
It is a delight, and it's a sequence that takes place in a monster club, and there's a scene in which John Carradine and Vincent Price watch a stripper, but she does not take off her clothes. She instead takes off all her skin, revealing herself to be a cartoon skeleton.
That sounds delightful.
It is.
Where do you put the dollar bills?
You will in the ribcage, of course.
Oh, I see.
You just stick them on a ribcage.
Do they sort of blow around like inside one of those machines on the old game shows where you had to grab all the money?
I assume so.
Yeah.
And between all the ribs, of course, whammies would pop up. I also found a quote from the guy, which he reflects on his career as a much older man. And he says, I wasn't a show-off director like Hitchcock. I paid the price for not putting myself about more, for not making myself more famous. I don't give a damn now.
Oh,
spoken like a true old person.
All right. So you would recommend checking out more of the oeuvre of Roy Ward Baker?
Oh yeah, he's like, as you can see with this movie, is that like he does have a certain style, and he's like not at a loss for creating like good visuals, and he certainly seems to have a sense of humor with how he directs his actors. Like again, look at some of the performances in this movie where the actors are clearly having fun, and that lends itself so well to something like The Avengers or a goofy movie like The Monster Club, but he's able to do it serious as well with Quatermass in the Pit, one of the scariest horror films of all time.
I had a moment of being like, it is a very pretty movie. Who's the cinematographer? And then I looked up Paul Beeson, and then I'm looking at his cinematography work, and he's done a lot of movies.
Oh, wow. Anything of note?
He was in the camera and electrical department for a bunch of movies, including Willow, Indiana Jones and the Raiders of the Lost Ark, Alien 3, Never Say Never Again.
Wow, the least pretty James Bond movie,
I suppose. Let me see if he's cinematographer on anything else interesting. Star Crash.
What? That's a great looking picture.
How did we miss that?
Oh man, that's a wonderful connection.
That is a really good connection. Oh no. we should make sure that's included. Lost Continent.
The Hammer Lost Continent or the MST3K?
Yes, the Hammer Lost Continent.
Because my God, how old would he be?
I had a bit of a moment there wondering about that. To Serve with Love. He was the DP.
He's done tons of cool stuff.
Yeah, but Star Crash especially.
Yeah, Star Crash and Moon 02. Perfect double bill. Now, how does that Kate Bush song go?
Hammer horror, hammer horror. Yeah, this is a Hammer horror. Well, it's not quite a horror, but it's a Hammer space western.
It's got a skeleton in a colorful astronaut suit, which is a great visual.
Yes.
Not out of place in a horror movie.
So I don't know that much about Hammer films. I mean, first off, I can't believe we haven't done a segment on them yet. I feel like we've mentioned them a bunch of times, but
yeah,
this is the only misted Hammer film so far. So I guess we haven't properly talked about them in any depth. I don't know a lot about them outside of what Kate Bush has taught me in her classic song Hammer Horror.
Yes.
This is not a horror movie. So is this an oddball Hammer film, or is Hammer more nuanced and diverse than I am led to believe?
All right. Well, to find out, we'll have to go to a little corner called Hammertown. No, there's no jingle for that.
Don't make me make one. I'm very tired.
Hammer Films starts off with a pretty unspectacular debut. So the person who was most in charge of it, or one of the people who was in charge of it in its heyday, was a fellow named Anthony Hines. His father, Michael, who was a failed comedian who had a double act called Hammer and Smith. When Michael Hines got out of the comedy business, he founded a film distribution company and called it Hammer. That was founded in 1935. It went bankrupt 2 years later.
Oh.
Yes. And it would be revived by James Carreras and his son, Anthony Hines, again, a little later on. They would get some success adapting BBC serials, whether from TV or radio, and you get the start of Hammer horror with the sci-fi horror of the Quatermass films. These would be the two black and white ones before Roy Ward Baker would do the color entry in the series Quatermass in the Pit in the late 60s. So you had Quatermass 1 and 2, and those were big, but biggest of all, or at least biggest up to that point, was in May 1957 when Hammer released Curse of Frankenstein.
Oh, is it?
What?
Is the Curse of Frankenstein? Or does he favor like?
I think that I think that actually his favorite curse would probably be curses.
Oh,
that would be his favorite exclamation.
That's meta.
See, that's the power of Hammer screenwriters right there. Thank you, Jimmy Sangster.
So, Curse of Frankenstein.
Yes, this is a film that launched the careers, at least in terms of international stardom, of Peter Cushing and Christopher Lee. Because Peter Cushing is, to my mind, the definitive Frankenstein, and Christopher Lee is probably the creepiest version of the monster ever filmed.
Oh yeah, why is that?
Well, I think that Christopher Lee's version of the monster, it genuinely looks like a mess of body parts rather than the stylized creation of the Karloff creature.
Oh yes,
and I think that's what makes him so like horrible to look at. They really take advantage of how like gangly Christopher Lee is.
Now, we talked about him a bunch when we talked about Castle of Fu Manchu, of course.
Yes. Even scarier than Frankenstein's monster is Yellow Peril stuff.
Yeah, really.
Yeah. So Martin Scorsese is one of the fans of Curse of Frankenstein, and he and is indeed a fan of Hammer horror in general, and describes Curse as having a, quote, graphic quality that was totally uncalled for.
What does that mean?
Meaning that for the time, Hammer films were a bit more advanced in the blood and gore department.
Right.
And so you got more bang for your buck if you were going to a Hammer film rather than American horror at the time, generally speaking.
Right, but it was an unnecessary amount of horror, of gore. I don't know about that.
There would be there were plenty of people who called it gratuitous at the time.
Right, but that's clearly how they're marketing themselves at a certain point, right? Like they know that the gratuitous gore sells to a certain crowd.
Well, at this time, that would be like a little more experimental. In 1957, that's less of a known quantity. It's like the Hammer were kind of like the first to do it, and they picked up on something that works as opposed to something that got them burned down.
All right. So after that, did they start getting more and more gross in their films?
They kind of kept up a certain level of gore for the time. There's some memorable deaths for Dracula, because what followed Curse of Frankenstein was Dracula or Horror of Dracula, written by Jimmy Sangster, and it was as much, if not a greater success than Curse of Frankenstein. It has again, perfect casting. You have Peter Cushing as Van Helsing, possibly the most Cushingest of parts. And you have Christopher Lee as a Dracula that rivals Bela Lugosi for the ultimate Dracula.
Oh.
Yeah, you have a taller, gruffer, sexier, and more vicious Dracula, a more violent Dracula.
Was there ever a Dracula v. Dracula type movie where the different ones would go against each other?
Sadly, there was never a Dracov to my knowledge. It had never even been considered, sadly. And part of the success, too, is that these movies would have great scores by a fellow named James Bernard, who was very open about his inspiration that he would take from the titles of the movies. Like, almost every Bernard score is him singing the title. Like, the score for Dracula is Dracula. That's how it sounds.
But he wasn't behind.
He was not, but we'll get there.
All right, we'll talk about that later.
So for a while, it was like Hammer could do no wrong. Everything they did was a hit, and they were praised for their stylish movies. But the 60s ran into the 70s, and interest began to wane, and the studio's attempts to branch out with fare like Moon 02 did not really work out.
Right.
So suddenly the gothic horrors of Hammer were competing with breakthrough American movies like Texas Chainsaw Massacre, and Hammer basically petered out doing like a few films here and there for the rest of the 70s, and then going on to TV for like Hammer House of Horror until they're like completely gone in the 80s. And until recently, the brand, not the company, nor anyone previously associated with the company, but the brand has been revived for making newer horror films, starting with the Americanized version of Let the Right One In, known as Let Me In, which I think was released in 2010. So Hammer still exists, but it's not quite the same Hammer, but it's coasting on the legacy of the Hammer of old, which was quite a legacy to have.
Hey everybody, it's time for the Shallow 13.
It's time for the Shallow 13. 13 mod little facts about today's episode. Go, Adam, go.
Let's start with the familiar faces. James Olsen plays our hero, Bill Kemp. Wait, he's kind of boring. But our baddie, Warren Mitchell, sure was a gas as 100% Hubbard, wasn't he? For even more fun with Mitchell, check out the films Manuela, Innocent Bystanders, Barnacle Bill, Hell is a City, and the Danger Man episode Find and Return. In all of them, you can see him alongside, you guessed it, Donald Pleasance.
Our other main character, Clementine Taplin, is played by none other than Catherine Schell, credited here as Katharina von Schell. She's the titular cosmic princess from KTMA episode 10, which we talked about back in It's Just a Show, episode 44.
One thing we didn't discuss in our episode on Cosmic Princess is that you're bound to have a good time if you watch The Black Windmill, where you can see Schell in the same film as, you guessed it, Donald Pleasance.
Bernard Bresslaw, who plays 100% Hubbard's muscle, Henry, is best known for his work in the Carry On series of wink wink nudge nudge innuendo-laden British films that mostly flourished in the 60s and 70s. He was in like a dozen of them. Oh, and hey, Warren Mitchell, 100% Hubbard himself, was also in a Carry On film, Carry On Cleo, as in Cleopatra. But Bernard Bresslaw wasn't in that one. And looks like Donald Pleasance also failed to appear in any Carry On movies.
Hey, your failure is some people's success. Bresslaw was very tall, 6'7", and because of this, he was briefly considered for the part of Frankenstein in Hammer's Curse of Frankenstein. That part, as we mentioned earlier, eventually went to Christopher Lee, who we discussed in our episode on the Castle of Fu Manchu.
Credited here as first card player is Michael Ripper, a Hammer Films regular who appeared in such Hammer horrors as Scars of Dracula, Taste the Blood of Dracula, and Dracula Has Risen from the Grave. Ripper would also appear in The Deadly Bees, Rift in Season 9.
Of course, Ripper's most important screen credit was appearing in the 1956 film adaptation of George Orwell's 1984, alongside, you guessed it, again, Donald Pleasance. Honestly, you don't mention the legendary Donnie P for a few episodes, and he makes a roaring comeback with a triple Pleasance word score.
Carol Cleveland appears here as one of the Moon's hostesses. Cleveland would gain greater notoriety for her regular appearances in Monty Python's Flying Circus, which would debut on BBC One the same year Moon 02 was released.
And Adrienne Corey, seen here as Liz the Space Cop, is best known to moviegoers as the ill-fated Mrs. Alexander in Stanley Kubrick's A Clockwork Orange.
Seeing Clem in her dark outfit complete with doofy-looking headpiece, Crow quips,
I'm here for the Gumby wedding.
Sure enough, many years later, Mike and the Bots would riff the Gumby short Robot Rumpus in Season 9.
Despite having put out over 1,000 variants of Monopoly, Hasbro has yet to put out Moonopoly. They even put out a Monopoly Astronomy Edition, but failed to name it Moonopoly. Pathetic.
Other editions of Monopoly include Game of Thrones Monopoly, Super Mario Bros. Monopoly, Juicy Couture Monopoly, Monopoly Pizza Game, Monopoly Fortnite Edition, Monopoly House Divided about partisan politics in America,
Monopoly Klingon Edition, which is in Klingon, Monopoly Tutankhamun, and the Golden Age of the Pharaohs, Sun-Made Collector's Edition Monopoly, like the raisins, Monopoly Unicorns vs. Llamas, Monopoly Cthulhu, Monopoly... I forgot about this. Monopoly Bass Fishing Edition.
Oh God, that's enough. That's time. This movie sure had music.
Yes, despite the objections of the bots, this movie has a score. However, to discuss that, we'll have to move out of our usual corner and move to a brand new corner that I like to call a jazzy little place called The Scorner.
Not making a jazz version.
No. So yeah, we're actually in the good hands of Don Ellis because I rather enjoyed this score.
I also enjoyed it, especially when I watched it without the bots.
Yes, because they completely crap all over the score, despite the fact that it's one of the many things the movie has going for it, that and the great Monopoly pun.
Had you heard of Don Ellis before?
Not a bit, although he had scored some films after this one.
Yeah, he's scored some familiar films even.
Yeah.
Not ones that I've seen, but ones that other people have seen.
Yes.
I feel like I'd vaguely heard of him from what limited jazz I listened to, but I certainly didn't know him very well. And he seems like a neat person.
Yeah, and he certainly brought out the best of himself for this very jazzy score with a great song. How does that go again?
I think it goes a little something like this.
Thank you. Yes, his musically, he is all over the place. I guess starting at the beginning, his first job was working with Glenn Miller's band as a trumpeter, and then he branched off on his own, forming his own bands and getting a record deal with Columbia. What he is best known for is that he is essentially playing with all sorts of different time signatures. In fact, it was remarked for his tragic death at the age of 44, very, very young. He died in 1978. Someone remarked, "Isn't it ironic that this guy played 5/4, 7/4, 33/16 time, but he died at the age of 44? 4/4."
Yeah. I mean, way to trivialize somebody who's died too young. But yes, it is ironic a little bit.
Yes.
Well, so he was known for his use of weird time signatures, but then he did something else that was quite interesting. He started incorporating electronics into his jazz. He was basically one of the first people to use things that we might call effects, pedals, other electroacoustic stuff, and I think some synthesizers as well.
Yeah, that I had read about, and again, part of the appeal of Don Ellis's music is listening to some of this. Like, some of his tracks are very, very memorable. I was perhaps unsurprisingly the biggest fan of his Grammy-winning score for William Friedkin's The French Connection. Like, finally hearing that. The title track is in 7/8, and it is just infectiously catchy, and I absolutely adored it. Although I also have a soft spot for a 1977 track called the Pussy Wiggle Stomp.
Oh, I saw that. How was that?
It's pretty fun.
I mean, a lot of the stuff that I saw as I was poking about his catalog suffered from that sort of era of jazz and their love of having naked ladies on the cover. But if you put that aside, and it's okay if you can't.
Oh, I just watched the video.
The video?
Yeah, there was a video of a live performance.
Oh, I see. Okay. I checked out in particular a few tracks from his album Electric Bath, which came out in 1967. And it's one of the first times when he used some of those electronic effects. In particular, there's a section of a song called Open Beauty, where he is playing with basically a tape delay. And so he's really just sort of exploring what this can do. And he does it very well. Like, it's very graceful, but it's also clearly like baby's first playing with, what are the basic things that we can do with this? And he finds some really interesting stuff to do. I liked it. I need to listen to more of his stuff. Yeah,
that's basically what I learned having listened to his music and being really first exposed to it with Moon Zero 2 is that he seems like an extremely cool guy, not just musically, but one of the things I found on YouTube cementing this is that rather than a piece of music, one of the first things that comes up if you look for Don Ellis interview is Don Ellis interviewing George Harrison.
Oh.
Yeah, and he clearly has a lot of respect for Harrison, which again goes well with me. The man was clearly the best of the Beatles. So, I mean, I'd say there's a lot to check out, and I look forward to uncovering it. I mean, I really liked Gil Malay, and this seems to be up that alley in terms of my musical interests.
There you go. The other thing I might point out is that apparently, I didn't actually go and listen to this, maybe I will at some point and report back, but he put out an album called Music from Other Galaxies and Planets, which a reviewer at allmusic.com said this LP is the only complete misfire of Don Ellis's career. And that generally seems to be agreed upon. The main thing is that he was the first person to do a jazz setting of the theme from Star Wars.
Oh boy. Are you sure it wasn't Jizz?
What?
Jizz, the fictional musical genre for the space jazz bands in Star Wars.
Oh, right. Doesn't that come out later, or is that in the first movie? I forget. Anyway,
yeah.
he did versions of the Star Wars theme and of Princess Leia's theme. They're apparently fairly underwhelming, and somebody went and did them better shortly after. I forget who now. And he put out a bunch of sort of rushed together songs and gave them spacey names like Vulcan and Orion's Sword. And apparently they're not that great. They're kind of phoning it in.
Aww.
Any other album is good. That album, which sounds so tempting and so promising, is apparently the very bad album.
Who knew? Space is not the place.
Did you ever want to be an astronaut?
I wanted to be a member of the Enterprise crew. I did not want to be an astronaut.
How is that different?
Well, I would say that being a member of the Enterprise crew, you can, one, wear cool pants.
Okay.
You can wear cool pants or a onesie type admiral type outfit. And you can be comfortable in space. You can have your own quarters with your own bathroom, presumably. And you are not just crapping in a spacesuit and constantly worrying about running out of oxygen or your cramped headquarters suddenly getting a breach and you get sucked into space. It's like, no. The Enterprise seems very, very safe. So Star Trek versus actual space. I think Star Trek wins.
Right. I mean, I think there have been some really bad disasters to people on Star Trek, but sure. That makes sense. Like, so when I was a kid, I didn't really think about that, and the idea of going into space sounded conceptually amazing. But it's true that as soon as I sort of realized the tin can nature of it all, I was like, oh no, that sure isn't for me. Although in terms of the fancy pants, I assume that these sort of candy-colored spacesuits that they wear in today's movie with the weird nipple attachment places, that surely must have changed your mind a bit.
That I would sign up for if it was the real deal. It's like, if I could look that cool even in a tin can, I would do it.
Excellent. This movie is a really interesting movie in terms of space movies. I already mentioned that this clearly is taking a bit of influence from 2001, which came up the year before this, right? 2001 comes out in 1968. And I don't know the whole history of things, but I think of 2001 as the film that introduced sort of slow, floaty, balletic ideas of what space is like, rather than these sort of sitting around and talking in a room that we see in Rocket Ship XM and so many Misty movies. And so this is definitely like falling from that. I also think it's really interesting that this is a movie that replaces the very classical soundtrack of 2001 with this wild jazz soundtrack. Both of them are sort of different kinds of soundtracks, I guess. Like there weren't that many films that were done with this sort of experimental jazz sound at that point. And it makes as much sense for a sort of very mod, futuristic vision of space travel as the sort of ethereal classical music did for the slowness of 2001. I don't know. Do you think jazz in space makes any sense?
Yeah, I mean, basically, what can jazz be if not as experimental as synth music?
Sure.
And music from some guys in space is totally a genre. Why can't jazz music from some guys in space also be a genre? I think it works.
I think Sun Ra would agree with you.
Yeah.
But the other thing is that this movie had the unfortunate luck of coming out in 1969. And more specifically, it came out in October of 1969, which is to say, just a few months after, we landed on the moon. Roy Ward Baker said about it, Moon 02 was a bad picture. It was hopeless and never got off the ground. We didn't have enough money to do it properly. It was crazy, a complete muddle, and it was undercut by the fact that you could turn on the television and see Neil Armstrong jumping about on the real moon.
Well, I think we've established earlier that Roy Ward Baker is a little hard on himself.
Yeah, I suppose so. But he's got a point, right? Like, it's really hard to sell that terrible fight scene when they turn off the gravity. The artificial gravity is turned off, and they're trying to fake doing this like free form thing where everybody should be floating. And like, sure, it's still the moon. There's still like 1/6 the gravity, as they say. But no, this is clearly just people moving very slowly in space, which is funny and works perfectly well on MST3K, but doesn't sell it compared to actually watching people on the actual moon live. But that said, it was interesting that like they had just enough time in those few months to actually insert a reference in the movie to, oh yeah, there's the site where Neil Armstrong first landed on the moon, right? I believe they added that line in post, because when they filmed it, this hadn't happened yet, and who knew what was going to happen, right? It was a really dangerous thing, and nobody knew it was going to be for sure. So you couldn't easily put that into a movie anytime ahead of time. And also, this leads to Joel and the Bots making a riff about Michael Collins at some point, right?
Yes.
And of course, I think it's worth shouting him out because he just passed away a few days ago as we record this. And he's a really interesting figure. He was the one who didn't go to the moon on the Apollo 11 mission. He was the one who sort of floated around the moon and took the photo of the moon and the Earth sort of rising behind it. And as I say, everybody who had ever lived or ever died was in that photo, except for him.
Wow. So you're saying as Michael Collins was a fellow with a grudge.
He was a fellow who knew loneliness. Michael Collins also wrote what is generally considered to be the best of the astronaut books.
Okay.
Which I have sitting on my shelf and haven't read it yet. It's called
Moon 02.
It's called Carrying the Fire. And friend of the show, Michael Collins,
No relation,
read it and talked about it on his podcast here at Megaphonic on Dear Reader. We'll have a link to that in the show notes. And, having the same name as that astronaut and a few other people meant that he'd always meant to get around to reading it. When he finally did, he was happy to record a podcast about it and loved it and thought it was really great. So if you want to know more about it, you should check that out because I still haven't read it, but I super want to.
Perhaps one of these days, although I'm still eager to read the novelization of Moon 02, which I assume is done by Alan Dean Foster.
Now that you say that...
Oh, there better be one.
It turns out that there is one. It was done by a guy named John Burke. And it looks like, at least based on this one blurb that I found while quickly Googling it, that in the book it takes place in May 2020. That can't be right.
What?
That doesn't make any sense.
So, seeing some of our futuristic spaceware, Tom likens it to the Power Glove.
He's got the Nintendo Power Glove there.
So the Nintendo Power Glove, is it the most famous video game accessory ever? I mean, they made a movie about it.
Yes, there was the infamous the Wizard, in which there's the immortal sequence in which the evil kid in the competition says, "I love the Power Glove. It's so bad."
Yes, all right, that is good.
But yes, the Power Glove was released in 1989 and discontinued less than a year later.
Yeah, that's pretty Nintendo.
Yeah.
Was it good for anything? Like, it looks awful to use.
It was.
Have you ever played with one?
I recall playing with one because some rich kids in town had it, and myself and my brother coveted a Power Glove, but we did not know how lucky we were in not having one. It was awful. You had to input codes in order to use it, so every game had a different code if you wanted to play it with the glove, because of course it responded to like different commands, and it just was awful and awkward. You couldn't play Mario with it that well.
No.
But what it's based on is super interesting. The glove came about through the efforts of Thomas G. Zimmerman and Jaron Lanier.
What?
And yeah.
So not Japanese names.
No, they're not. They are Americans. They created the Data Glove.
Okay.
And there was so much interest basically in this glove that you could use to basically do similar things. Like you could manipulate programs, computer programs. It was initially designed so that there would be like visual code for coding.
Oh, okay.
That you could manipulate with this hand. But later there was interest from NASA for virtual reality type experiments, or virtual simulations, I should say, and similar virtual simulations for medical purposes. So there was all sorts of interests in the Data Glove. And the Data Glove later got licensed by a group called AGE, who teamed up with Mattel to make the infamously crappy Power Glove.
Wow. Huh. Did anything happen with the Data Glove?
I don't know, like outside of its initial use. Like I know that it was used in the 80s. I don't know if it's still in use today or if there's some variant on it. There's a great little documentary about the Power Glove that is totally worth watching, which we'll have a link to in our show notes. And yeah, I found it interesting, but man, the Power Glove was far from the only accessory that you could get with these video gaming systems.
Yeah, there were lots of different things, especially it feels like for the NES. I kind of coveted the robot attachment.
Oh, Rob the Robot.
Yeah, it turns out that was also crap.
Yes. And it only worked with like 2 games.
Yeah. But famously, like that is the thing that they were using to sell it because, video game crashed in 1984. They tried to position it as more of a toy than a video game console because they thought it would sell better, or at least not even that it would sell better, that it would get it onto American shelves, which were all gun shy because they had lost so much when Atari collapsed, basically. And so it was in all the ads for it, and it just made it seem like it would be super fun. It was so weird. It was like unlike anything. And it turned out for a reason, because nobody needs this. But when my family finally bought a Nintendo, it was the pack that came with both the light gun and the floor pad.
Oh, you had the Power Pad.
The Power Pad, with which you could play track and field type games until you realized that it was much more efficient to just lie down and pound them with your hands.
How was the Power Pad on your feet? Like, how did it feel?
It was fine. I mean, I don't know. I was young. I didn't care.
Okay. I just wasn't sure how comfortable it was.
The light gun, of course, was intensely frustrating if you're not good at light gunning, which of course I wasn't, but it was still kind of fun to play with, and it looked cool. It looked a bit like Megatron, and that was good.
Yeah, it was great. I remember being good at the only game we had for it, because we had the cartridge that was Duck Hunt and Super Mario on one cartridge.
Yeah, see, that's what I had too, but it had a third game on it, which I think is track and field. I could be wrong.
Oh, to make use of the pad. Gotcha. Now, Did your Power Pad come with a game called Dance Aerobics?
No.
Oh, okay. Because that's something I looked up and found, is that there was a game called Dance Aerobics in which you follow the moves of an adorable sprite she's like an aerobics instructor, and she has a pink leotard and big white leg warmers, and she does moves on the Power Pad.
That's cool. That's fun.
It's super neat. Like, I don't know how much fun it would be IRL, but finding that out was great.
Oh, man. That was like the golden age, it feels like, of weird accessories. Well, now I take that back because, of course, now with the Switch, I don't have one. I have a Switch, but I don't have a Ring Fit. That's the big thing now.
Oh, what's the Ring Fit?
The Ring Fit is this big tube that you do like an exercise thing with. It's sort of the replacement of the Wii Balance thing that you were supposed to stand on and do exercisey Wii Fit trainer type stuff on.
Oh, okay.
But now there's this giant ring and you go on. It's called Ring Fit Adventure, and you exercise monsters, and you exercise, and that causes you to defeat monsters. You don't get to exercise monsters, which, now that I say that, is a far better idea for a video game.
Yes.
If you could do the things and it was like you were leading an exercise class for kaiju, and you can just move around, and the Godzillas and Mothras and everybody else would also like wave their arms back and forth and do push-ups and such. Wait, that's what I want. I want that right now.
That's a game. That is a game that I want.
That is such a game.
Well, I suppose we've said everything we can possibly say about... But perhaps we have room for one last thing, a little tidbit, one final factoid. Chris, is there anything we missed, anything else we should know about
Yeah. You know, one of the fun features about making a mod space movie that you're making in the late 60s, even though it's going to be set 50 years in the future, is that you have to make all sorts of choices about the fashion, about the interior design, and you got to make bold choices because it's all futuristic. And one of the things that was featured prominently in the space hotel or whatever you want to call it are ball chairs.
Oh, right.
Now, you know all about ball chairs, I assume.
Well, I've never sat on my balls in a chair, for which I'm eternally grateful.
These are these sort of egg-like chairs. They're very white, and then they have sort of it's like a white sphere, and then a cross-section has been cut away from it, and then there's like a chair inside it that you sit inside. Oh, totally. I don't feel like I've ever sat in one.
No, I definitely haven't.
I don't know. I know I've been near them, but they kind of never looked super comfortable, but maybe they are. People look comfortable in them. It was made by a guy named Eero Arnio, a Finnish interior designer, in the 60s, of course, 1963. And it's a stone cold classic, of course. It's in all sorts of movies and TV shows, especially that are trying to evoke that kind of futuristic modernism stuff. It's in The Prisoner, you might remember.
Yeah, so they've got the great circular chair.
Yeah, and it's in Men in Black, kind of famously. It's a really neat design, but it also just seems hopelessly impractical.
Yeah, I've had experience just once sitting in a replica of the Prisoner chair, which was on sale for a ridiculous price from Wales itself. But I don't know, I felt pretty cool in it, like I had some sort of power.
It definitely looks cool. Like, I definitely want a photo shot there. And maybe it is cool to like put your whole body in and curl up with a book or something. I don't know. Listeners, if you've sat in a ball chair, please write it in and tell us what it's like, because those are heights that we can only dream of achieving.
And we've seen Moon Zero too.
If you've been affected by the issues on this show, if you're also named Michael Collins, or if you'd like to ask us anything, please get in touch with us. Our website is itsjustashow.com, and we're on Twitter at itisjustashow. We'd love to hear from you. This show is made possible by listeners like you. For as little as $1 an episode, you can help us research and record this show, and you can listen to all our superfan bonus bits. Find out more at itsjustashow.com/Patreon or patreon.com/itsjustashow. And if you want to follow up on anything that was mentioned today, you'll find links in our show notes at itsjustashow.com/episode/93.
Whew. Well, I think that that's totally taken care of all of our discussion of what possible movie with a hopefully catchy theme song will we be discussing next time on It's Just a Show.
Well, next time we're going to get back into our Season 8 stuff with Season 8, Episode 10. Let's see what that one is. Okay, it is called The Giant Spider Invasion.
I haven't seen this one.
Nor I. Spiders are scary.
Yes, and giant spiders, I can only assume, provide giant scares.
Unless they're very cute giant spiders.
Which is possible.
Is this one a cartoon?
No, sadly, there is the main feature's not a cartoon. Hopefully the opening credits are.
All right, I'll know when to turn it off then. All right, well, I guess we have to start reading up on spiders.
Yay!
Remember when we learned all about ants for Phase 4?
Yeah, it'll be that again.
And we learned all about worms for Squirm?
Luckily, I missed that one.
Well, then you have to do your homework about spiders for the giant spider invasion.
Yay, now I can look at wolf spiders.
But until then,
save a purple jumpsuit for me.
And remember to take it away, Theme Squad. Hammer horror, hammer horror.